What's up, guys? We're talking about Eternals today, the Marvel film that has probably received more hate than any I've ever seen. It's nowhere near as bad as that. Definitely would put it way above Thor: The Dark World, way above Captain Marvel, and probably quite a few others. Now, it's not a particularly great film. I do agree with most of the criticism it's got. By Phase 4 standards, Eternals is a perfectly fine film. I genuinely think after Endgame, Marvel has been on a decline. Phase 4 has not done it for me. Now, in its defense, Eternals had a massive task. It essentially had to introduce 10 new characters as well as basically give us a creation story. You know, this is the MCU's version of the Bible, I suppose. And some of the Eternals are really interesting characters. Barry Keoghan's Druig is the most interesting character in the film. I really wish we got more time with him. Kumail Nanjiani's Kingo is quite a good character, again utilised for typical MCU comedic relief, but there's a lot going on in his character that again could have been explored more. Same with Angelina Jolie's Thena. I thought there was a really kind of interesting PTSD element that they introduce but never fully explore. And that's because the Eternals that the narrative kind of puts in centre stage are Gemma Chan's Cersei and Richard Madden's Icarus. Now, I do feel really sorry for Gemma Chan because this is obviously her second MCU character she's portraying after being a kind of henchman in Captain Marvel. And she is, quite frankly, the blandest protagonist that Marvel have introduced in a long while. She's easily the least memorable Eternal. She had nothing resembling a really kind of emotional, compelling arc in the film. Same goes for Richard Madden. I thought he had a really interesting kind of character turn, and I really think Richard Madden is a phenomenal actor. If you haven't seen Bodyguard, go watch that. But I don't think the film fully exploited the kind of narrative twist about Icarus. Now, Chloe Zhao is a fantastic director, and what I don't like is when kind of franchise films get blamed on the directors. This film suffers from being too bloated, having to set up a lot, planting the seeds for characters who are going to be kind of significant later on but are just insignificant here. Kit Harington. And I don't think that's Chloe Zhao's fault. I think she brings a really fresh visual style to Eternals that obviously subsides when we come into, you know, the classic CGI world-ending BS that happens in the climax. But her, you know, her lovely landscape vistas, shooting on location for a change, which has a really nice tangibility to the settings in a lot of the scenes. So it's got that very distinct Nomadland feel to it. I think the most annoying part of Eternals for me is that there is a really good film in there somewhere. They introduce some really interesting ideas like Miltonian concepts about creation and whether we should be able to challenge our creators, what about our divine purpose. Those kind of debates get brought up but never really delved into. And the Celestials turn out to be nothing more than your kind of typical CGI villain overlords, very bland figures. Like, these are the roots of all existence kind of thing, and they just feel insignificant. I'm grateful that they also kill off a couple of Eternals in this film, and you know, that kind of thing is instrumental now in the MCU, where characters just get brought back, they get to play multiverse versions of themselves, so the idea of death as a permanent state in the MCU has been completely undermined. And the other main problem with this film is we spend about kind of an hour and a half essentially assembling the group kind of thing. So it's a bit more of a road trip film where we just stop off, collect another Eternal, stop off, collect another one, and it just feels a bit repetitive after a while. I also thought they could have exploited the timeline a bit more. Like, we get a few flashbacks to the Eternals as a really cohesive family unit in the past, and I came out thinking it would have been a much more interesting story to have two parallel narratives, one set in the past of the Eternals fracturing and one set in the present where the Eternals learn to reassemble, and the kind of two collide at the end. I thought that would have been a much more interesting narrative sequence. But yeah, there's not a lot more I can say. I think the score's fantastic. There's a couple of really good tunes on the soundtrack. It's just an okay film. Like, I wish it had been a lot more. If you're the typical Disney consumerist drone who like laps up everything they release, you'll love it. There's nothing wrong with Eternals. But if you watch more than just kind of franchise blockbusters, you'll know that this film's missing a lot. And I've been with the MCU since the start. Endgame was the best cinematic experience of my life, and I loved those films up to that point. But now I'm over that emotional anticipation. I watch everything they've done, but with a much more neutral eye, because the MCU just feels like it's expanding for the sake of expanding and milking more money out of consumers now. That it doesn't feel as organic a story. So let's sum up. Eternals. Storytelling, a bit all over the place. Could have been a lot more streamlined and focused. Characters, some of them land. Unfortunately, the ones they put in the spotlight don't really. So it's the peripheral characters who shine and make us wish we'd had more of them. Action, forgettable. Your kind of typical superpower CGI smackdowns that don't really have any kind of dramatic weight. Script hints at some profound ideas and themes underlying the narrative that aren't fully exploited. At least Eternal starts to touch on some interesting new ideas, particularly with its antagonists of, what right do we have to challenge our creators? Are we really the villains if we challenge our divine purpose? And so there is an underlying spirituality to Eternals carrying the narrative through. Would have liked it to have come to the surface a bit more. And that's how most MCU projects feel to me now, is that there's some very beautiful but repressed ideas underlying your typical kind of CGI dullness, your comedy, and it's lost in that kind of typical narrative formula that MCU kind of stick to. And that's what makes it so annoying to review these films, because there is a fantastic film in there somewhere. We just don't quite tap into it. But yeah, would love to know what you guys thought. Drop any comments below. Liking and subscribing would be a massive help for my channel. Stay tuned for more reviews and original content soon. Thank you.